Islands guest line. Isn't it time for you to discover the islands? River Islands in Lathrop. Let's bring in Mike Yam, host on the NFL Network, friend of the program. Mike, how you doing? Good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, always appreciate the invite, guys. Happy Thanksgiving, because we are knocking on the door of that, and certainly looking forward to some good football.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me throw this at you. I'm kind of throwing it out to our listeners today, and it's about the 49ers. And they're 5-6, and I'm just wondering, if I gave you three choices, one would be, you know what, they're going through some adversity right now, but they're still going to win this NFC West, and they're going to go to the playoffs. That can be one sentiment. The other sentiment could be, you know what, we just don't have it this year. We've been bit by the injury bug, but things will change, and next year we'll be fine. This is a gap year. Or the third would be, you know what, this team may be in trouble long term. Which of the three would you choose, or a hybrid of the three?
So I actually don't think it's the latter, right? I mean, look, there are windows, and typically teams' windows aren't insanely long to begin with. I'm not a believer, though, that this window is closing and we need to blow this thing up and start from scratch. I mean, I think there's very few teams in the NFL that would be able to navigate the sheer abundance of injuries, and then injuries to key players like the Niners have had so far this season. It sounds like a cop-out, but the reality is, I don't know if you take, this roster is as good as any, when healthy, as good as any in the NFL. The issue is when you start out the season and it's, basically half the year before Christian McCaffrey comes back. Brandon Ayuk gets a huge deal, and, he's been a non-factor because he gets hurt earlier this season. There were some distractions before the year started, not only Ayuk's contract, but Trent Williams, to see George Kittle be out, and now Brock Purdy. There's a lot of factors at play. It was good to see Kittle back in the lineup, but I just don't know how many teams can take that much talent, that high-level talent, and still expect to go and win. Now, I don't know if this team – I don't think this team is a playoff team if they don't win the division. The beauty of it this season is the fact that the NFC West is really in flux, right? I mean, Seattle, Arizona, and the Rams, we're all talking about, basically a game separation. So they're in it in terms of the division. The problem for San Francisco is they've already lost to Seattle at home. They lost to an Arizona team. So when tiebreakers start coming into play, that's a factor. And the margin, because there's not much real estate left in the season in terms of the amount of games, every game is a must win. And I thought the Seattle game a couple weeks ago was one that they needed to have. They didn't get it. I think going on the road to Green Bay without your starting quarterback is a problem. And they got manhandled in that game. And it's not going to be easier against the Bills on Sunday Night Football. So for as much as this is the longest-winded answer to what was a relatively simple question, and I apologize, but I don't think it's time to blow up. I do think they've just been snake bit by the injuries.
Good stuff, Mike. Let me ask you about Brock Purdy. And everybody's hoping he plays Sunday night against Josh Allen, right? But he missed last week. But this season, Mike, he hasn't played bad. I hadn't been able to put my finger on it. But even from the outset of games, I'm just like, that was an odd throw, but it's just an incompletion. What have you made from Brock Purdy when he's been out on the field this season?
Yeah, it's been a little different, and I hate that it has looked a little different, to be totally honest with you, because I've been on the Brock Purdy, bandwagon. I don't think it's fair, the amount of criticism that he's gotten the last couple of years and the perception of his game. I think, look, at the end of the day, this dude's going to get paid, considering what the quarterback contracts look like. This guy's a $200 million guy just based off of the market alone. And that's that's the going right now for what quarterbacks go and do. And the problem is, San Francisco is going to rely on him to sort of execute at a high level. And I think the concern that I have about his play, and this goes back to some of these injuries, right? Like the complete perception of what this team can be offensively at their best is very different than what we're getting right now. And I know it sounds like a cop-out, and where you can easily point to a lot of teams that are getting hurt. But the one thing about Brock, and more specifically the quarterback position, how do you elevate the guys around you? And right now, when I think he does a great job of making sure that the players around him are ridiculously successful, but I don't know if there's another gear right now from what I'm seeing with this Niners team, where Brock Purdy is single-handedly lifting this squad. And I think that's the difference. But once again, I don't know if Brock Purdy is, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I think he's an upper echelon quarterback, certainly top half and, fringe top 10. But there's only a handful of guys. There's like 3 or 4 off the top of my dome that I can name that can say, hey, that guy can elevate your team and single-handedly carry them. And by the way, one of those guys are going to play this week. Josh Allen's one of those players. I think Lamar Jackson is one of those players, right? But these are two of the guys on the short list for the MVP this year. Patrick Mahomes is another one. So not everyone can have one of those guys. San Francisco's fortunate they have a dude. He's just not quite at that level, but he's in that next tier.
Mike Yam joining us from the NFL Network. We're talking San Francisco 49ers. Christian McCaffrey's been back 3 games. Yep. Doesn't quite look like himself. Is that just normal rust, or would you be a little bit more concerned about age and injury over time?
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned. That's a big chunk of time that he was down for. I still look at him as one of the elite guys. I think what's sort of more alarming to me is this is a guy that's sure-handed. This is a player that typically does not fumble the ball in his career, and to see one uncharacteristic. That said, I saw Derrick Henry fumble, and he never fumbles. And he fumbled the other night against the Steelers, or a week and a half ago, or whatever it is at this point, against them. I mean, it was issues that Baltimore had in that game with penalties, like things that don't happen. Justin Tucker missing 2 field goals, Derrick Henry fumbling, 12 penalties against the Steelers, and they lose by 2 on the road. I think sometimes in sports, and you guys know this, it's not just an NFL thing, it's a sport thing. When things are going wrong, it sometimes snowballs a little bit, and I think injuries combined with not being out there, not getting a ton of reps, I think sort of have led to this with CMC, but certainly not worried about him long term. At least I'm not.
Wow. Mike, let me run this by you. All season long out here in the Bay, all we heard from the reporters is the shape that Deebo Samuel was in, and this was the best shape of his life. And now he's almost been rendered ineffective. And I'm asking you, because I came down this road with the whole Pepper situation on the sideline, especially when he wasn't having the bad year. I didn't like how he handled it, but he didn't do much Sunday, didn't talk to reporters. Have we seen the best of Deebo, or is this on Kyle to kind of reinvent the Deebo experience?
Actually a great call. We were doing game day preview on Sunday morning, and this obviously was one of the signature games for a lot of reasons. 2 good teams, a San Francisco squad that was sort of desperate for a win. And Steve White, who's one of our analysts and reporters at NFL Network, we were talking off air about it, and he turned to me and like, Deebo's been a little quiet. Like, this is the game for him, because we know how dynamic he could be. A couple years ago, it's my favorite player to watch. I mean, it just felt like every big play, it was explosive play after explosive play. It was yards after the catch. It was, a lot of creativity in terms of using him. And God, I feel like every question I'm answering with some sort of injury issue, but I think that's the story of this season, to have, some of the issues that he's had health-wise this season. I don't think that's sort of helped the situation. I saw him bust out for, 1 touch that he had and thought that might spark the team over the weekend, and it certainly didn't. Candidly, I don't know what to make of what we're seeing, because when you had asked me about what this team is and some of the issues long term, that one's a little bit of a red flag for me. And I think most Niners fans who have been watching this team probably are concerned about him, because he went from, on the short list of one of the most talented wide receivers, and certainly the amount of ways that you can use him, to a guy that's not having that type of impact. And I don't know, I'm with you, I don't know what to put my finger on this one and how to explain it, but it is concerning, because when you don't have Brandon, like, someone else got to step up, and he's getting paid like one of those dudes. Yeah. And he's got the ability to be that guy. We just haven't seen it. Like, who's the player on this Niners team that is going to lift them out of a 5-6 record into the postseason? And there's numerous guys. Like, Kittle's playing his butt off every single time I go and watch him, right? But, like, that's clearly not enough. So I don't know if it's a quarterback situation, Brock being healthy. I don't know if it's like, hey, get this trio of McCaffrey and Kittle and Deebo working on the field together in unison, but something's got to give, and they got too much firepower and too much star power not to be in the playoffs this year.
Mike, you still think they're going to win the NFC West?
Candidly, guys, I don't know. I don't think it happens.
I thought we lost the connection with you for a second.
Yeah,
keeping it real.
Because I know who I'm talking to, right? And like the fans there, like I get it. Like, you expect this team to be there. I think the one thing I'm learning, and it's a tough lesson that I learn every single year. and you guys know this, you guys are in the radio business. I know what happens, right? Like, before the season starts, we speculate, we talk about what could happen with these teams. We feel good about a roster, get back to the Super Bowl, look on paper and look at what we have. And yet it doesn't play out that way sometimes for teams. And it hasn't for San Francisco. And I think the problem that I'm having is I look at this roster, I think about the expectation level, I think about this team, and one of 4 teams that I would have said, hey, can win the Super Bowl this year. And now they're sitting at 5 and 6 on the outside looking in, and they've got some losses in the division. Like, this is a problem. And I think what I'm learning is at some point you need to boot. And maybe we're past that point. I don't know if it's the midway point. I don't know if it's 5 weeks or 10 weeks into the season, whatever you want to call it, where we just say, hey, this is who this squad is, no matter what we thought or how much we think they can be good and make a run here. And that's what concerns me. And I just, it worries me. The division is gettable, and that's why the door's still open. I just don't know if they win it.
Wow, Mike, I need your help with this one because my partner and I have been going back and forth. I'm no, offensive genius, but I've called Kyle Shanahan a genius in regard to scheming plays and dialing it up.
Yeah.
So when McCaffrey was out, Jordan Mason popped for 5 weeks. I'm not saying he's Earl Campbell. He led in broken tackles and led in rushing. But since McCaffrey's come back, he's been an afterthought. And I just look at the Andy Reeds and the great play callers thinking, Ben Johnson in Detroit, how can Mason just be an afterthought? And people are like, well, what do you want him to do? Just make it happen. Is that too far-fetched as a fan to wonder and scratch my head? Hey, Kyle, you got to make it work. I'm not saying 20 carries, Mike, but he's got to have an impact.
Yeah, look, I do. I'm with you, and I think Kyle Shanahan is on the short list of one of the best coaches in the NFL, and it's candidly a reason why I was hedging on this game. And I know that sounds crazy heading into Green Bay on the road without Brock Purdy, but I felt like, all right, Kyle's so good and might be able to scheme up a game plan. Maybe the defense steps up where Jordan Love, who's been susceptible to interceptions, maybe there's a turnover or two that creates some easy point opportunities for San Francisco. That didn't happen. The only pushback, and I'm with you, because Jordan Mason hasn't necessarily been that dude since CMC came back. I also think when you're down 17-0, basically to start this game, it does become difficult. But I also don't know what the option is, right? Like, you're on the road in Green Bay, Brandon Allen's your quarterback, you're down 17. Like, do you just say, hey, let's just grind this thing out and try to claw back in it? Or are we in a position where we have to take some chances? And I just think all the things that went wrong, they couldn't have had, they needed a fast start. They couldn't fall into a deficit the way that they did. And I think that affected some of the production that you saw coming out of that backfield.
Mike, thank you so much as always for joining us, man. Have a great Thanksgiving and rest of your holiday season.
You guys are the best. Always appreciate the invite and looking forward to we'll talk again. We'll find out into the season if this team is a playoff squad.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
All right, take care.
That's Mike Yam, NFL Network.